This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, let's do a little introduction then. Jen and Rob, you know me. I'm Dr. Steve Boreham. I've spent a lifetime career as a geologist and an ecologist working in East Anglia, but I've been for more than 30 years a trustee of Hobson's Conduit Trust, and I've published on the geology and the ecology of the Cambridge district. And I have one of my particular interests is freshwater pollution ecology, and particularly cold water springs. So, and obviously, if you read the short report I wrote about the condition of Nine Wells at the moment, you've seen I've published on a number of occasions about Nine Wells, its ecology, and the Hobson's Brook corridor. We've got John Latham, who's the chair of Hobson's Conduit Trust. And he, I'm sure, will correct me if I go out of line and say something which is my opinion, but doesn't represent the opinion of the trust. So that's why he's here. And we've got Liz Whittle, who has again spent a lifetime career looking after historic monuments, watercourses, gardens, and so on. And she's here because of her tremendous experience with looking after and managing these kinds of assets throughout her entire professional life. Is that a reasonable summary, Liz?
Very reasonable. I'm also a trustee, and I'm vice chairman of the trust.
Okay, so is that okay, Jen and Rob, so you understand why these various people are here?
Yes, yeah, that's fine, thank you. Okay,
great. So without further ado, what I'm proposing to do is do this little presentation, okay? And I'll be pausing at various points. But I'm not necessarily expecting you to go, wow, you know, there's a huge reaction and what have you. But what I have to say is that what I'm about to present is the result of a concerted citizen science effort, whereby Hobson's Conduit Trust has availed itself of the latest monitoring equipment, and I have provided training to a cabal of trustees who have diligently monitored the situation at Nine Wells and along Hobson's Conduit for the last 2 or 3 years. And the reason for this is it became quite clear to us that the in situ flow monitoring that Cambridge Water had put in place was constantly being choked up with debris and silt. We have some flow monitors further down the system which suffer from the same problems, and it became clear to us the only way for us to really get a grip on what was happening at Nine Wells was to do it ourselves and do it properly. Okay,
Steve, would it be okay if I just sort of respond to a couple of points? The first thing is, thank you very much for hosting the call for us all today. It's really good to see you all. You mentioned that Hobson's Conduit being a sort of like a small cog in the big wheel of the water environment in East Anglia, and I suppose to, you know, if we were really brutal, geographically speaking, yes, that might be true. But actually, I think for Jen and I, and for the environment as a whole, we take very seriously issues affecting all our watercourses, surface and groundwater issues across East Anglia. I'll be a little parochial and say I'm not overly worried too much about things outside that border, although I must admit I do have a sort of a certain passion for all things chalk stream related. You know, if I could see those chalk streams come back into their more natural condition, I'll call that a career well done, and I'll be able to retire in due course with a smile on my face. So a bit of an aspiration there. I'll also confess as well, I'm a massive history buff, and you know, Hobson's Conduit, the historic source of water to Cambridge, that really, it just flags massively in my mind, and it really matters. You know, Jen is without doubt our water resources technical expert, and I'm very much led by her expertise on things. But, you know, really speaking, we take Hobson's Conduit, issues affecting the conduit, the brook, Nine Wells Springs, incredibly seriously. And thank you for all the things you guys do to represent those interests. Citizen science is definitely a massive thing, which is rising in importance. And I think we're quite blessed, I think, Jen and I and our colleagues, because we do get to work with folks such as yourselves who know what you're talking about, and, you know, have the expertise and experience to back that up. So the report that you shared with us, you kindly shared with us, you know, thank you very much, not only for the quality of that document, but also so that we could share that with Nina and our ecology colleagues. You know, it's on a par with the sort of stuff that they do, and that makes it makes things easier for us in a sense, because there's no questions about quality of information, techniques, equipment, or anything like that. You know, it puts us all on an equal footing, which is fantastic. As you go through the presentation, you know, if there's things that we can, any particular questions and stuff like that you'd like to ask of us, we'll certainly try to answer them where we can. It's that, you know, we certainly don't want to just be in listen mode. And we can talk a little bit about what the situation is currently and some of the possibly a bit of feedback, Jen, if we can, around the meeting we had with Cambridge Water just at the end of last week around the next price review work. So yes, sorry, thank you very much for letting me say that.
Thanks so much, Rob. That's really great to hear. And let me be really clear. I don't want to dwell particularly on the condition report I sent. You know, for us, it's clearly important, and that was endorsed by the trustees of Hobson's Conduit Trust. And you know, I'm glad you think it's up to standard, because I spent my entire life doing that. That was, you know, part of my professional life. So thank you. But that's important though that is, there are other issues that and I also flag that I asked for this meeting to be without Cambridge Water, because there are issues here I need to talk to you about directly without them putting their contribution in. I'm quite happy for you to share all of this with them later if you so choose, but that's why we want, you know, it's just a gentle chat between us and you and us, so we can have this little exchange. And we're very grateful for the forum to be able to present a couple of our concerns. And you know, okay, so if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to try and share out my screen, if I can work out how to do this. Does that work for everyone?
Yes, it does.
Okay, super duper. So here we go. These are the issues. I'm not suggesting I'm going to spend a long time on each of those, but I'm not going to go through each of them. You can read them there. Okay, and the last one, of course, is controversial, and we can have some fun with that at the end. So, you know, it's well structured, and you can, you know, I can send out a PDF of this presentation later if you would like. Is that okay, everyone?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, so let's kick off. I don't want to mess you around here. Let's think about a little introduction from the Hobson's Conduit Trust perspective. Nine Wells here forms an important green corridor that stretches into the heart of Cambridge, and without water, Hobson's Conduit is nothing. And you may or may not be aware, Rob and Jen, that over the last few years, every year, the Hobson's Conduit Trust has run a BioBlitz to record biodiversity along that corridor. And it has a great record now, some of which has recently been published in a book showing the tremendous biodiversity which relies on the water supply in Hobson's Brook along that entire corridor. And of course it has great importance for the people who live in that relatively dense urban area. So from our perspective, yes, the heritage is important, but the trust is also absolutely focused on trying to maintain and protect the biodiversity of that corridor. And I'm sure you've seen something like this before. It's a map of Nine Wells. It's quite a small enclosure. You know, it's a couple of 100 meters long and barely 100 meters wide. And I wanted to show the difference between spring heads. We tend to number these 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are geographic features like craters, whereas individual springs come and go, but you can see the individual issues which add to the long chalk stream section here. There's close to, you know, maybe 150 meters worth of chalk stream in the site. And this area here is called the exit pool. It's where we measure our discharge measurements, and it's also where beneath the small bridge and a concrete sluice there is a probably now defunct flow monitor, solid state flow monitor with some gubbins. And also along here, this is the injection system, so the water's coming in through here and then supplied along a pipeline to various boreholes. There are 4 of them, and you can see the idea that this one is broadly supposed to support these 2 springs, these 2 are supposed to support this one, and this one is supposed to support this one at the end. So everybody happy so far?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we're all aware of the changes in the groundwater and the relationship between the groundwater level in the chalk and the flow coming out of Nine Wells. And here you can see the data from 2018, and you can see the groundwater emergency of 2019 here. There's no logger data there because it was too low in the borehole and the logger couldn't record it. And you can see this is the nadir of flow we had this year, not quite the same as the groundwater emergency, but close, and of course the recovering the water here. So it gives us an idea of the, you know, this is great times. There we go. This is absolute peak of flow, February full dike, everyone's happy. And in fact, 2021 wasn't that bad, you know, in the context of the last few years. And I've put on here the triggers used by Cambridge Water and the Environment Agency to start doing stuff with the augmentation system. So everyone happy about that? Just setting the scene. Okay, so my first issue, and Jen knows about this because we've talked about it, is when you have a look at the augmentation data, and by the way, one of my pet peeves is I've no idea why we have to wait a year to get the augmentation data from Cambridge Water. We get the groundwater data in real time. I've no idea why it takes them so long to get the augmentation data out to us. That's one thing, but let's put that aside, but Steve is irritated. The issue here is that the license seems to suggest an augmentation at full blast of just over 22 litres a second. And yet the data that's been provided to us shows that the augmentation is about 16.5 litres a second. That's about 75%. And there's a couple of issues with this. And one of them is we've never had the full benefit of the augmentation license, it seems to me. There've been tremendous engineering problems. But my criticism of those engineering problems is that corners were cut, they tried to save money, they kind of did a bodged job. At one point, water was pouring out of one of the injection boreholes and across the ground surface, and the only way they could deal with that was to reduce the injection augmentation to about 75% of maximum. That was their holding solution. And I'm afraid I'm not satisfied with that, because it means we're not getting the augmentation we're supposed to. I know that there are going to be some engineering solutions to make that right, but I just wanted to put it in there that you know, it's easy to believe the augmentation system has been working as it was designed properly since it was switched on, and that's not really true. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Jen, you look like you might want to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with you. Looking at the data, they haven't augmented above 60 cubic meters per hour for the last couple of years, what we have data for. So yeah, just to back up what you said there, they're not using it at maximum capacity. I think they are hoping to do some testing, as you say, to put the higher rate in, but it will take some engineering solutions, but there doesn't seem to be much kind of rush for Cambridge Water to do that. But yeah.
Jen, with the license, is it? I see Steve's previous slide was talking about the stages on there, the various trigger lines on the graph. Yeah, is there? Does the license make an allowance for that? You know, is it a reduced quantity at stage 1? Is it a higher quantity at stage 2, and in that way, or is it just go straight for the full amount?
We'll talk about that. That's one of the issues. So sorry to cut you off, Jen, but that's one of the things I want to talk about. So there's a little bit of an in-depth thing about that, Rob. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That's not
fine. Okay. So if we're all happy, I'm going to move on from there. I just wanted to start off saying, because we rely on this water for the entire system, and by the way, Vickers Brook, that it has been, which is fed almost entirely by overflow from the Hobson's Brook system, it relies on this augmentation flow to keep in good condition. There's brown trout that are breeding in Vickers Brook, which is a tributary of the Cam, obviously, and so it's not just Hobson's Brook that suffers when things don't go right. It's the whole of the ecology down this important corridor, wildlife corridor, and Vickers Brook, which is being held up now as this another example of a chalk stream connected to the Cam. So moving swiftly on, does the current trigger system, this is what Rob wanted to know, does it work to protect the site? And there are 3 current triggers, which we've seen already on the graph, and they're 14.9, 14.6 and 14.2 meters OD in the borehole. And at those points, the equivalent flow coming out of Nine Wells is about 30 litres a second, about 25, and down at 20 litres a second. And what happens is there's a feathered augmentation system. I worked very hard with Julie Barker, one of your predecessors, Jen, at the Environment Agency, because I pointed out prior to 2018 that simply switching the augmentation on and off in a binary mode could cause quite a lot of damage to the site. The idea at that time was to have a 20 litres a second equivalent threshold. And what I pointed out that there could be months where the outflow from Nine Wells would hover around 21 litres a second, doing all kinds of untold damage before we suddenly flipped on and suddenly the flow rate popped up. And so I designed a number of different feathering techniques. And I believe the current situation is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the augmentation at the lower rate, that's about 5.6 litres a second, starts when trigger 2 is reached. That's 14.6 meters in the borehole. And then augmentation ramps up to 80 cubic meters an hour. That's 22 litres a second once you reach trigger 3. And it continues as long as the water in the borehole is below that magic 14.2 meter figure. And then it reverts to the lower rate, 5.6 litres a second, once we get back up above 14.2 meters OD. But then it continues until the higher trigger is reached. It's ostensibly an asymmetric augmentation model.
So we don't at trigger 2 then go back to that 20 cubes an hour, the 5.6.
No, it's from the data and from the emails which we see telling the Cambridge Water to do. The point of trigger 1 in this model is to retain the lower level of augmentation until it reaches the higher trigger.
Okay.
So the data seems to support that, and the paper trail also seems to support that. Is that broadly your understanding, Jen?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
However, that's not how it was supposed to work. And in my models for Julie Barker, we created a symmetric augmentation system. Same triggers, but the trigger 1 started augmentation or feathered it in at 10 litres a second. At trigger 2, the augmentation went up to 15. And at trigger 3, the augmentation was full at 20 litres a second. And you can see one of my models here, which is what would happen. This is a very typical, it's real data actually, typical way that the flow at Nine Wells slowly decreases, and then suddenly, as the winter rainfall takes effect, there's a very rapid increase in the outflow. And you can see the modelled effect of that 3-step flow support augmentation to try and keep everything ticking along nicely. And given the asymmetric nature of the natural flow, in other words, it slowly reduces down and then suddenly upticks, having an asymmetric model where the extra flow is added at this end it's a bit odd, frankly, because if it was going to be asymmetric at all, it should be the other way around, and it's absolutely nothing like the original flow support model I developed with Julie Barker. So we think there's something broken with the way the triggers are implemented. And if I just show you this, if you see here, there's a period here where the asymmetric augmentation regime, it performs quite poorly as the groundwater in the borehole falls. And here you can see the prolonged augmentation going on. So really, there's that's the issue. We think we'd like the EA to take another look at those triggers. By the way, this is the equipment we use. It's a Vailport 801 electromagnetic flow sensor. And what this presents, this graph is in orange is the augmentation rate. In blue is the modelled predicted discharge using the EA model. And in the red here, we have the Hobson's Conduit Trust citizen science flow monitoring. And you can see that apart from bits of variation, it's working fairly well. So we're able to track the model, and we can see the benefits. So the predicted model here shows a dip based on the borehole levels, and we can see the benefit of the augmentation. And so that's the same sort of thing here. So it's worked really well for us to be able to see when augmentation is happening and that it's working. And I have to say we were fairly satisfied with this. This looks like it's working tolerably well. This not so much. And of course, the story from this year, and we're going to talk about it in a moment. Are you happy with that?
Yeah? I don't want to put words into your mouth, Jen, but I mean, what I find interesting there, anything above the line almost seems like a surplus, an additional benefit over the scheme design. Anything below is obviously where it's underperforming. So yeah, that clearly says to me that an adjustment in triggers is required.
We're just asking which is flagging from our data, we think there's something a bit weird. And it's certainly not something. I can provide the original documentation that I did with Julie Barker if that's of any interest, but I personally have no idea why the current asymmetric in the wrong way, the wrong phase was adopted, and the type of gentle feathered approach to this, rather than it's almost like nothing, a tiny bit, and everything. We now know that everything, it's not even everything, is it? We're only getting 75%. So it's, you know, what I'm trying to say is we're not getting everything we're supposed to get, and it's being supplied in a rather odd way. Okay, so can I move on? Is that okay? So as we have collected our flow data using our citizen science project, I started to notice something a bit odd. And that was that, and let me say, these are the triggers, these 3 dots here, and this is a linear regressed line. It does seem to be a fairly linear thing. And these red dots here, these are the unaugmented flows that we recorded. And I started to notice that down the bottom end here, repeatedly, the flows that we were measuring were a bit too low for the height of the water in the EA borehole. And so when you do that on our data with a different linear regression, what you see is that the current ground water model seems to overestimate the discharge at Nine Wells based on the groundwater height in the borehole in quite a worrying way. And so you can see that, you know, let's take this one. You can see this is when the first level of augmentation is supposed to start. It's equivalent to about 25 litres a second, but actually it's more like 20 litres a second at the site. And the 4.2 is, well, it's supposed to be 20 litres a second. Goodness me, it's somewhere below 15 at the site. And we noticed this discrepancy. And, you know, it's quite odd. And we think that it might be worth reevaluating the relationship between the outflow at Nine Wells and the height of the water in the borehole, because since the measurement with solid state devices at the exit pool in Nine Wells is so tricky because of wood and leaves and silt and what have you, everyone said, well, look, we kind of understand the relationship between the height of the water in the borehole and the outflow, so let's use that for the triggers. You know, over a couple of 3 years, we've come to decide that perhaps the triggers aren't necessarily in the right place, because then they don't reflect the level of the outflow from Nine Wells that had originally been modelled. So we're asking, could that be looked at again?
Yes, I think we would agree with you there. We need to do some work on the relationship between groundwater level and surface water flow. When we drafted the licence a few years back, we had limited surface water data. So I think it was always recognised that we'd have to do a bit of trial and error with the triggers and get a few more years data and then reassess. And as you say, it looks like, according to your spot gauges, that it's slightly out.
So one of the problems with that is that there was an assumption that the solid state flow monitoring would return reliable data. And it blatantly doesn't. We know further downstream, Hobson's Conduit Trust's own solid state flow monitoring is less than fully reliable, and that's why we decided to, you know, roll out this once a week somebody goes out there and actually measures it, rather than trying to rely on slightly wobbly data. The slide I've got at the moment highlights the current situation. I'm not going to dwell on the reasons for that at the moment. We all understand that there hasn't been augmentation there for more than 2 months, but it's shown exactly that, the pattern from the last slide, because this is the modelled, in blue, the modelled recovery of the outflow, and this is the actual outflow from Nine Wells, and you can see they are adrift quite considerably. You know, the situation at Nine Wells described in my condition report might not have been quite so dire, but there seems to be a discrepancy here, and that's the, you know, that this set of data here is the hang on a second, is the absolute output of this scatter of data here being above the line. So
the thing
real
with
world
the
out.
totally get where you're coming from with this, Steve, and you know, I think it illustrates the point very well. What we can certainly do, Jen and I, is share this with our groundwater modelling team, who I'm sure will be very interested indeed in the information. You know, it's like with every model, it's absolutely dependent on the quality of information going in. And as Jen rightly says, you know, we want to continue to improve that. There's no drama there. So what we can do is make sure they're fully cited on this issue, and that's not a problem. What I can't commit to, because I do not control that team. You know, Jen and I work together in the Brampton IEP team. This is a sister team, if you like, another internal team. So it will be down to their budget, their work plan about how they can fit this in. So I can't make any commitments. I'm sure they will want to, because we certainly would like to see that happen. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of timeframes and how they can do that, you know, we can't make that commitment on their behalf right now. However, what I would hope to hear from them is some thoughts from them about how they could seek to improve that. So I don't know what their sort of schedule is for updates to the groundwater model, or how they might go best go about that. That would be something that we'd need to share with you after having some conversations with them.
Well, look, Rob, I'm more than happy to share our data, and that's why we've collected it. But there's something else which might affect that. So if I can, because the whole reason that we think that there might be a problem is that there might have been an unexpected outcome of installing the injection boreholes. And this looks like a fairly unassuming photograph of Hobson's Brook, just downstream of Nine Wells. I think the credit for this is probably John Latham, although I think Liz took some similar photos for me. But the thing that we're looking at here is that, and I've highlighted it in this photograph because this is a completely new issue of chalk water which has occurred downstream of Nine Wells underneath the bank. And what you're looking at here, this spread here, is eroded white chalk on the bed of the stream. And one of the things that we think might be happening is this. So this is a cross section of Nine Wells. The outcrop of the Tottenhove stone is just here. This is a spring head. This is one of the natural springs. And of course, the idea of this system is that the augmentation borehole discharges water here. It finds its way up through the chalk, the joints in the chalk, and supplies the springs to keep Nine Wells in a good condition. And obviously, correlation is not causation. We do understand that, but we find it suspicious that for 30 years, there have been no major springs along the stretch of Hobson's Brook just downstream of Nine Wells. And within months of there being the augmentation boreholes installed, we now find this new issue has developed just downstream. And what we suspect might be happening, and I'm now putting my geologist hat on, the Totten Hoe stone has a rather shallow angle of dip. And it looks to me as if just perhaps the pressure of water from the bottom of the injection boreholes may have found a route through the cracks in the chalk, circumventing Nine Wells completely, running perhaps along a bed of more clayey chalk, the grey chalk beneath, and it's caused this new issue. So perhaps one of the reasons that the actual outflow into Nine Wells seems to be broken might not be that the EA's model is dodgy, or that could be, but it could also be that half or more of the water that's being injected in here is missing the springs completely and bypassing it. Great news for Hobson's Conduit, because it means we get all the water, we think. Well, actually, when I've modelled it, we get about 70% of the water, about 30% of the water goes somewhere else. But we're getting the water. The problem is it leaves Nine Wells high and dry with much less water than had originally been modelled. And this is for us anyway, it's an entirely unexpected effect that we really hadn't perceived was going to be an engineering problem. In other words, if we think perhaps if the augmentation boreholes had been further away, back up the slope a little bit more, perhaps this might not have happened. But I've got no way of proving it's true, but I'm just showing this thing has happened, and it's happened within months of the augmentation being run at full rate. And it's not something that's been there for 30 years. So all the trustees are going, goodness me, look at that. That's a completely new spring, which has, there we go. So again, I'm not sure there's a lot you guys can do about it, but perhaps one of the reasons is the groundwater model is broken. It's not really broken, or it might be broken, but we're losing a proportion of the water, quite a large proportion of the water, to the geology. It's doing something unexpected and it's great for Hobson's Conduit. It's terrible for Nine Wells.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Jen. Obviously, want to share with the groundwater team. The injection boreholes. It's been a little while since I've been to Nine Wells. 2021, actually, come to think of it. Are those boreholes sited in the field alongside?
Yes, they are. There was a map of them at the start. And
yeah. Sorry, I just didn't see the boundary between the nature reserve and the farmer's field.
Just a few meters from the enclosure boundary, right. And probably 10 to 15 meters from the actual spring heads themselves.
Okay, yeah, I can see it in my mind's eye.
Well, we can look at that later. We can circle back if you really want to see that.
No, it's actually fine, Steve. I'm just, as I say, we actually hosted a visit from one of our senior directors to Nine Wells in July 21, and highlighting the challenges on chalk. And we ended up parking our cars actually in the field alongside, so we could get through. At the time, it was perfectly accessible, and the landowner was quite happy with that. So I'm just mentally, just in my mind's eye, I'm just trying to think where those boreholes are, because as you say,
that was upslope, Rob. You parked upslope of Nine Wells.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I was just wondering about how far into the field that might go up.
And that's on top of that you're sitting there on top of the outcrop of the Totten Hoe stone, which is the jointed member of the chalk which provides the water. And in fact, in the field next to Nine Wells, you can actually see the fold in the landscape where that relatively competent stratum it creates a much steeper slope along there. Yes, so the spring heads are like craters in that Totten Hoe stone, and the water comes out through joints.
Yeah, and as you, absolutely, and as you say, a potential method of alleviating that would be to move those boreholes further up the slope, as it were.
Yeah, my concern is the damage is done and the joints in the chalk have opened up. I don't have a solution. We're just reporting as a trust.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
This is unusual. There's something really unusual happened, and it seemed to be at the same, just after the augmentation started at full blast, and it's gone on. We now see that some of the augmentation water might be bypassing Nine Wells, and that's not really the point of the augmentation, if you see what I'm getting at.
No,
I don't
absolutely.
know how to fix it, but as a geologist, I can see the mechanisms which might be at play. Do you mind if I move on? Because
sorry, yeah, absolutely.
I'm not trying to stifle discussion, but there's a couple more things I'd like to talk about.
Yeah.
This one is a thorny issue because, as well as discharge measurements using the Veilport meter, we measure temperature and dissolved oxygen at the exit pool. You can see we use there's a hack HQ30D, state-of-the-art piece of kit that we use for this. We measure temperature because the output temperature of the springs, the groundwater, is supposed to be around 10.2 degrees C. So any wild deviations from that, we know we've got issues. And we measure dissolved oxygen because we know the nascent water coming out of the chalk aquifer isn't at 100% saturation. It's down at about 90–95% usually, and that's the springhead fauna are adapted to those slightly lower conditions. So what we noticed in our data are these dips in dissolved oxygen whenever augmentation was switched on, and we were grateful for the extra water, but not grateful for the oxygen stress that the spring heads were suffering, apparently as a consequence. And a different way of looking at it is this. So the blue dots here are discharge from Nine Wells with no augmentation at all against dissolved oxygen, and you can see there's a fairly predictable pattern. High flows give higher dissolved oxygen and lower flows give lower dissolved oxygen, sometimes perilously low oxygen. But what we discovered is when we measured the discharge at full augmentation, we get a completely different pattern, and a worrying one, which is all of that data is far lower in terms of dissolved oxygen than it should be. And there's even a suggestion that the higher the discharge coming out at Nine Wells, the lower the dissolved oxygen is. And I'm really concerned that whilst we, as I say, we're grateful for the extra dissolved oxygen, sorry, the extra water, the quality of the water is actually causing an ecological problem at Nine Wells. So we give with one hand, but we take away with the other. All the fish exit, some of the invertebrates die, the kingfishers don't go there anymore, and as an unexpected consequence of trying to preserve Nine Wells as a springhead, pristine springhead environment, protecting it from drought, instead what's happened is that we've caused an ecological disaster and hugely impacted the biodiversity.
Well, there's a situation that none of us want.
Can I say that I've seen exactly the same situation when I did a survey for NE, Natural England, in chalk springheads all the way along the Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Suffolk chalk edge back in 2002, and it's a problem, for example, it was a problem at Foulmere. where the pipeline ran close to the surface and heated up the chalk water before it hit the spring heads, effectively making them uninhabitable by the spring head fauna that has to have low temperatures and reasonable dissolved oxygen. So it's not unknown as an unexpected and unwanted engineering effect in this kind of thing. It's just really, really unfortunate that, you know, and I'm sorry to say it, in many ways, the fact that we've only received 75% of our license allocation might have actually been a blessing if it's causing that. Can you imagine just in a world where this is all true and it's not imagined, the low oxygen impact might have been much worse in Nine Wells, and indeed the excavation of cracks in the chalk and the creation of new unwanted chalk issues along Hobson's Conduit might have been much worse had they managed to pump at 100% of their the original license. So we're kind of from our citizen science observations with decent equipment and committed trained people, I'm sorry to say it's a Pandora's box, and that, you know, it seems to me as if we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't, and we're desperate to reach a parsimonious compromise where, you know, we can provide water for the Hobson's Brook and its corridor. We can try and protect the environment of Nine Wells, and the Environment Agency and to some extent Cambridge Water are happy. That's what we're aiming for. But I don't think the current situation is it for really all of the reasons I presented. And just for fun, you understand, Jen and Rob.
Yeah.
You know, the damning indictment is that, as you well know, Cambridge Water stopped the augmentation for 2 weeks in mid-July, using a clause in the license we had no idea about. And the problem is that the discharge dropped below 15 litres a second at Nine Wells, the target being 20. Hobson's Brook just stopped flowing into Vickers Brook at that point, causing problems in Vickers Brook. And of course, the air temperatures during the day were up at 30 degrees C. And so the water temperatures down the whole Hobson's Brook system and the Vickers Brook system went right up. And of course, the dissolved oxygen went right down. Now, there was a hail of protest from all kinds of conservation and wildlife, government and non-government organisations. But then, as you well know, the augmentation unexpectedly stopped again, and we're more than 2 months in now, still hasn't stopped, and discharge at Nine Wells was below 9 litres a second for all of that period, that 2 months. And in early October, it was below 3 litres a second for the whole site. I mean, basically the whole site was stagnant. It was exactly the thing that the augmentation was supposed to prevent. And of course, you can imagine we're very upset as a trust and very frustrated. And what I wanted to point out was, having talked to Cam Valley Forum, is that the Nine Wells augmentation system seems to be very unusual in the Cam Valley, in that it's controlled by Cambridge Water. The other augmentation systems don't seem to be controlled in quite the same way, although I could be wrong, but that's what I've been led to believe. So my question is, and I'm expecting the answer no, but is there any way that the Environment Agency could gain control of the this augmentation system, or at least police it in a more, you know, change the terms of the license or do something to make it more robust? I mean, I've been giving talks, as I do, about Hobson's Brook and Nine Wells, and just 2 years ago I was saying, look at this data, the augmentation system is brilliant, it's doing exactly what it was meant to do, this is the way forward, people. And now I can't give that lecture. Now I have to say, I'm afraid it's been a huge, grave disappointment, and its failure allowed untold damage to the ecology and biodiversity, especially at a time when we're supposed to be doubling nature. You know, the City Council, Cambridge City Council particularly, is looking at Nine Wells as an enormous biodiversity asset. And you know, it stands out like a sore thumb in the context of that. Can I say also stands out, you know, the current Cambridge water policy seems to be no deterioration in the present position. Well, that didn't work, did it? And so you can see, to rest my case, Your Honour, Hobson's Conduit Trust are dischuffed, shall we say, in a number of different aspects of the augmentation system. And we've lost all confidence, frankly, in the ability of Cambridge Water to supply this water in a timely fashion, and the amount and the quality that's really needed to do the job. The whole thing smacks of being a little bit Heath Robinson, a little bit last minute, a little bit cost cutting. Oh, has it broken? Oh, we're sorry about that. We can't really fix it in a time. There we go. So look, I'm going to stop my rant. Thank you, Jen and Rob, for being so tolerant of. Hang on, I'm supposed to stop the share. There we go. Thank you for being so tolerant of listening to my my monologue. And I guess we've got, if you want to say anything, we've got a few minutes for closing comments.
Yeah, first, Steve, thank you very much for sharing that with us. I think you've raised some very pertinent points, which Jen and I need to go away and have a good think about. There's one thing that's in my mind which I'm not necessarily sure I completely agree with, and that's the use of an augmentation scheme to mitigate against drought. I don't believe we ever say that any augmentation scheme should do so, but that's a minor thing in the range of issues that you're raising. It's clear from the evidence, and it's not just opinion, this is evidence, where you know we can see that the augmentation scheme is not delivering everything that it was designed to do or expected to do. And you know that issue around the dissolved oxygen is a really challenging one. The idea that we're accessing the same sources of water to help boost the flows, and then to find that water can be causing problems for the ecology is just, it's awful, really, isn't it? And I'll be honest with you, my first reaction is it makes me put a big question mark around the augmentation scheme of itself. Jen will shout at me for that, quite rightly so. Obviously, the augmentation scheme was a cost-effective solution to the problems that the Conduit was facing. There are some things in here which we can take away, as we've touched on, particularly around the groundwater modelling, and to share with colleagues. I'm sorry we don't, it would be really interesting to have from Matt from the team to be able to sort of talk around that, and also to have Nina on the ecological side of things to talk about things there. I mean, Nina's actually out on the ground today, I believe, so I wasn't able to join us. But the issue, can we take back the scheme from Cambridge Water? The answer obviously is no. We can't afford to. Frankly, we don't have the budget available to do that. I don't think anyone has ever, well, I'm not aware of us ever purchasing an asset back from a water company for us to operate. So that just, there's no way forwards on that one. It is their scheme. Jen, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain that elsewhere in East Anglia, other companies operate augmentation schemes over in the east, for instance. I'm sure Anglian Water operates schemes over there, on a couple of rivers for a similar, perhaps not the same effect of protecting such an iconic springhead and chalk stream, but certainly to provide additional flows when they would otherwise not have them in the rivers because of public water supply abstractions. And I mentioned we did meet with Dan Clark from Cambridge Water recently, and certainly there have been numerous emails over this summer from both Jen and I to Cambridge Water Company people, Dan, Natalie Aykroyd and other directors up there, expressing our disappointment that the scheme is not operating as it was intended to do so. I'll be honest with you and say that there are some aspects of the abstraction license that we are looking at and are meeting with our legal team to see what, if anything, we can do to make things more stringent. But I can't offer any guarantees that we'll be able to change those without some sort of voluntary acceptance from the company. So it is something we're still exploring, because I would certainly like to see that that license to be better. On the subject of license and the quality issue, it's interesting as well. I'm sure, like with all of our abstraction licenses, it will say we don't guarantee the availability or quality of the water, which is, I appreciate, a bit. It's not a great thing to say. I'm not overly uncomfortable with that, and I'm still really disappointed that we're seeing that DO issue from essentially the same source. So that is really interesting. I think there's some real value in a further meeting to be had with Cambridge Water, particularly in light of the ecological report. I would really be interested in their views on the points that you're raising and what their suggestions are to make the scheme better. Now, Jen, please, again, scream if I'm speaking slightly out of turn. Late last week, Jen and I had a meeting, a Teams call with Dan Clark, and we were going over their price review submissions issues in there. And I think previously you may be aware that the company were somewhat reluctant to put monitoring into the list of schemes. Jen has very successfully changed that mind and put across our very firm view that monitoring should go forward. You know, it's all very well having a scheme, but we've got to prove that the scheme works. And if the scheme doesn't work, and as Jen has rightly said previously, you know, we set off with a certain approach with triggers. We've got to refine them over time. That's just, you know, that just seems obvious to me. And you know, it needs to reflect the situation that we're actually seeing, not some hypothetical or model situation. So I think we need to continue with a conversation about changing that matters, refining that matters. But there's some real killers here, though. This dissolved auction, I'm struggling to think of a way in which that could be addressed. It is outside my personal area of expertise, and I'll be very interested in the thoughts from Nina and the ecology guys on what we might be able to do. Ultimately, I suppose, and this is looking quite some years ahead, we don't want an augmentation scheme there because we don't want to have abstraction from chalk. And we are heading in that direction, but I won't lie and claim that's going to be anything that's going to happen in the short term. You know, that is a long-term aspiration. I suppose on the positive side, there's the work that's ongoing around Fens Reservoir, and Cambridge Water are represented within that and will benefit from it. I'm sure you're aware that the project team have now highlighted where their preferred site for that over near Chatteris, which isn't very far away from where I am actually. But there's obviously a whole host of work to be delivered. I mean, they're carrying out the public consultation on that site selection at the moment, I know that, but then there's a whole host of work about the development of that site, the building, the abstraction license we would need to determine, and the reservoir to come into operation. I strongly suspect that only when the reservoir comes into operation, there'll be a further period to prove things and you know, make sure that it's resilient enough before we'll be able to start making moves to reduce their licenses, their chalk abstraction, both from Cambridge and from the others as well. So that makes me think that we're probably looking in the 2040s before we could reasonably expect to see that actually happen. But we are definitely making the case to them that that's what they can expect. This isn't something that you can have as well as and still have these problems going on. And we're also not blind to the challenges of increased growth. Particularly in Cambridge we all know it's a mega hotspot for such things, and the effects on the water supplies around there is just going to be under increasing pressure. So it's a very challenging situation with no immediate opportunities to improve matters in the short term. That said, what I do think is interesting, I'm sure you look at our water situation reports on gov.uk, and even whilst we've been in the middle of this this drought through the summer and those extremely hot temperatures. And we've seen some of the boreholes. You look at Linton, for instance. Linton was crashing like an elevator with the brakes off, to be perfectly honest with you. But you get to the end of August, don't you? And all of a sudden, Gog Magog starts to improve, and that's down to the abstraction being turned off at Babram, as Jen and I were discussing only recently. And that kind of makes you think that actually, if you do take away that water company abstraction, the situation is going to improve drastically. And quite quickly as well. But of course,
can I cut in there, Rob, as a geologist, and say one of the issues that I believe we have is that since the sort of current abstraction regimes in the chalk generally across the Cam Valley has been in operation broadly since the mid to late 60s, none of us living have ever seen the natural fluctuation in the chalk groundwater. And historically, it's quite clear. I mean, historical evidence shows that right along the fen edge from Suffolk into Hertfordshire, before that abstraction regime was put in, chalk groundwater flows in both the summer and the winter were significantly higher. And so we know that there's both long-term recharge water in the chalk and the recharge from this year. And my suggestion here is that what's actually happened is that year on year, the abstraction licenses have borrowed into the savings account, which is the stored water in the chalk, as well as this year's recharge. And I think those, with climate change, I think those pigeons are slowly coming home to roost. In other words, baseline that we see is a very different baseline to the baseline that would be occurring naturally, and that every year, apart from not just the recharge, but the abstraction licenses allow scalloping into the savings account as well as the current account. And what that results in is generally lower flows and less resilience in the chalk groundwater. So whilst I think Hobson's Conduit Trust would completely accept that there's nothing the EA can do about drought, which is being influenced by external factors, the severity of that drought is being exacerbated by not just the pumping of the aquifer for potable supply, but also a hollowing out of the base level flow, which otherwise would have provided a cushion. And in other words, the situation we're in now is the product of perhaps half a century of exploitation of the groundwater at just slightly more than its holding capacity. And many of the controls that are in place now were devised decades ago before anybody even thought, oh, evapotranspiration and rainfall in the future might be different. And so, you know, I've always argued, especially during the groundwater emergency in 2019, that it's time to reassess where we are. And I know that doesn't, you may or may not agree with me, but
I don't think I do disagree, to be honest with you, Steve. I think that describes the situation really well. The only thing I would add to that is, you know, I think as a society we could also look at decades of underinvestment in water resources, and the world is changing definitely. You know, a few years ago, apart from those passionate folks like yourselves, chalk streams weren't on the national agenda. They weren't even mentioned. Now look at the situation. So, you know, the world is definitely changing. There's no doubt about that. I'm very much minded about what we can do and also what we can't. So there are some things which may be beyond our ability to change. I certainly think that there's things we can do around our groundwater model, subject to the team being able to factor into their work plans. I do think reflecting the challenges with Cambridge Water will be very valuable. I think that would help us with our conversations around looking and reviewing the triggers and those flows. I think there's probably some really honest conversations to be had about the quality of their installation, see if there's any issues there. However, with that one, I'm not a civil engineer and I don't know any. So what we can do about changing that, I don't know, but I think we can, Jen and I can make some conversation or have some conversations there to look at the effectiveness of what the scheme is trying to do and highlight where it's not doing so. The long-term stuff, we're going to continue supporting the development and the work of our role as a regulatory partner with Water Resources, Development Defence Reservoir, etc. And literally, as we speak, colleagues of Jen and I, led by a chap called Ian, actually, are working very hard on the abstraction licenses that the water companies hold, looking to cap those. As you know, chalk streams, they bar a few notable exceptions, which are designated, but otherwise it's the Water Framework Directive that offers protection. So, we have that obligation to prevent deterioration in status, and that comes around. So every few years, there's things that we can do within that. However, the companies also have the avenue of deferring caps and things through overriding public interest. Otherwise, the conversation wouldn't be about protecting chalk streams and the environment. It'd be about, why the tap switched off in Cambridge. So,
Rob, can I just ask you about the Water Framework? I understand we've got to wrap this up quite soon.
sure.
Can I just ask you about the Water Framework Directive? Because last time Hobson's Brook was assessed, my understanding is that its categorisation was deferred on the basis that there was not enough information. And yet, had anybody asked, there was an abundance of information, flow data, ecological data and such. So I don't know if that's still the case, but in the last cycle that I was aware of when I was teaching at the university and running field trips, water quality field trips in the Upper Cam, when we were asking about the Water Framework Directive categorisation of Hobson's Brook,
yeah.
And obviously there are. I'm aware of all of the different categories and what have you, but the aim was to keep it in quote good condition, and we in the Hobson's Conduit Trust hoped that categorisation would come through and would be the driving force behind trying to improve ecology and such and flows. And we're not aware of any maybe there's been a classification, we don't know.
Now, the current classification on the Catchment Data Explorer shows moderate ecological status. And when it looks at the hydrological regime, it talks of does not support good. There's clearly more to be done there. What it does start to fail for is on the chemical side, but I'm afraid, unfortunately, I think every river in the country fails.
Can I just say, we
side.
have, because of the developers, we adjacent to Hobson's Brook, we have a lot of chemical analysis data for not just the brook itself, but the water going into it. So, and that's given to us by APEM, the contractor, the environmental contractor. So again, what I'm sensing, trying to draw the meeting to a close here, is that there's an awful lot of data sharing. There's a lot of data that the trust have, and I'm sure would be happy to share with the Environment Agency to progress things. That's why we did it, obviously. We've been monitoring flows further down the brook. The chemistry is very well known. We did a citizen science project to monitor the bacterial contamination or otherwise of Hobson's Brook quite recently, about a year ago. And so there's quite a body of data if the Environment Agency wants it. And, we're really open and happy to share that data. And I think what you've said to me, to summarize then, is, and I'll wait for you to ask me for this, but there's data out there that we have, which you may want. We're happy to have further meetings with yourself and with Cambridge Water. But perhaps you now understand why we wanted this initial meeting to be just you and us, because our experience with Cambridge Water in the past has been that we're dismissed as at best enthusiastic amateurs, and at worst just an irritating fly buzzing in their ear. So, you know, that's why we wanted to tell you first, and perhaps for some work or not to happen with the Environment Agency's modellings team to give a little bit of robustness, so we're not just brushed off like crumbs on a table and say, yes, I know you people like messing around in water, don't you? But, you know, so, but I want to thank both you and Jen for making the time. I'm conscious of the time clicking on, so I think we should wrap this up, but with a commitment to share information and try and, as long as you can, the worst thing for the Hobson's Conduit Trust is to be out of the loop. That's the thing. And we love, it doesn't matter if it's, even if it's not such great news, but we have regular meetings, and being able to report that. We are a charity after all, and it is our mission to protect Hobson's Brook, Nine Wells and the Hobson's Brook corridor. So being able to put that in our meetings and report back is great. The worst thing for us is, you know, nothing.
We understand that, don't we? Jen, sorry.
Yeah, just as Rob alluded to, we've asked Cambridge Water to put the Hobson's Brook back into the WINEP for investigation in AMP8 about the effectiveness of the scheme. So that work is ongoing. The WINEP's due to be finalised in March. At that point, we'll have to have a scope. So I'd like to work quite closely with yourselves and Cambridge Water to come up with a scope of work, AMP8. So this meeting's been really useful to come up with some kind of further ideas about what could go into that scope.
That sounds brilliant, Jen. Thank you.
Yeah.
I must say, just agree with Jen there. You know, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to issues at Nine Wells, there's three particular groups who have a role to play. There's you, there's the company, and there's us. Now, some of our conversations with the company are more, let me call them more regulatory conversations. We might not always be able to share the actual detail with me being rude to them, but you know, otherwise. Otherwise, the sharing of information, I think, is absolutely vital. We've certainly tried this year to make sure. I've been very disappointed that the company have seemed reluctant to engage with yourselves and let you know what's going on. As far as I'm concerned, that's just totally unacceptable. You know, they're a public utility, and just as a normal taxpayer, even though I'm an Anglian Water customer, I should say, you know, it disappoints me hugely that they're not talking to you when you clearly know what you're talking about and are part of the solution. So, you know, there's still some there. Accessing of information, you know, I'm sure we'll be pleased to do it. We'll have to have a think about how we do that and who does that and make sure people are aware. But we are, as an agency, we are slowly improving how we can talk with groups such as yourselves around citizen science, because, you know, you've seen things in the press about our monitoring budgets under some serious strain. It would be ridiculous of us to try and think we can just rely on our own resources. We can't. We need to go out and access more. So I'm sure we will be very keen to come knocking on your door for that, to help improve our understanding. But meanwhile, as I say, thank you for the invitation and thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. It's been really, I found that really fascinating. You've made me think about some interesting things. I'm going to be Googling all afternoon looking at geology stuff now. I really will. But, you know, our commitment is still that Nine Wells, the conduit, the biodiversity there meets the standards that you're expecting, that we're expecting, and you know, and it absolutely deserves. So we won't be just giving up with this because it's a difficult thing to do. We will continue to do everything we can within our powers to improve the situation. And as I say, ultimately, my own personal ambition is to see that we don't see any abstraction from the groundwater. I've got a bit of a suspicion, looking at the whiteness of my beard in this film, I'm not sure I'll be able to achieve that, but I'll do everything I can to in the meanwhile. Anyway, thank you again for the time. I appreciate we've chatted on longer than we really should have done, but it's been genuinely really good to talk with you all. So thank you, John.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. I think that was really productive.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay,
I'm going to be talking in future. Thanks very much.
We'll be in contact.
Thanks,
Okay.
Rob. Thanks, Jen.
I'm going to end the meeting now. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers now.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye now. Thank you.